All right, welcome everybody to this new Canadian Patriot podcast, where I am most happy to once again be joined by my good friend Anton Chaitkin. I've been working through Anton Chaitkin's Volume 2 of Who We Are, America's Fight for Universal Progress from Franklin to Kennedy. This Volume 2 tackling specifically the years 1830s to the 1890s. He's currently working on Volume 3. Whether it's going to become a trilogy or a quadrology or beyond, I don't know, but we'll see where it's going. So far, my mind is getting three is your goal. 3 is your goal.
Yep.
Okay. All right. That's it. That's a good things come in threes. Um, you never know. I thought I was doing a trilogy too, and then it turned into fiveology. So yeah, we'll see. Uh so Anton, you're doing something very, very special and I think very strategically important on a variety of reasons that people need to properly understand because you come from a generation which still had a connection to an appreciation, much more so than my generation and younger. But this appreciation that scientific and technological progress are good things, and that imperialism works very hard to undo culturally and economically dynamics of scientific and technological progress. You're coming at your research reviving an appreciation that has been cut off from many of the younger generations that I think is so important because without that appreciation, you can't really understand anything about what's good about America, what made America at different points and the world thrive and overcome crises which periodically befell us where societies could have easily have fallen back into feudalism on a number of occasions, but due to certain creative modes of thinking, a certain insight into natural law, we didn't. We were able to overcome, and today if we don't revive that appreciation, we're screwed. So what you're doing, you and I were chatting a little bit before before we hit record, and I'd like to just ask you straight up, what is your intention in working through this trilogy and specifically volume 3 in a general form before we get into some specifics of what you're bringing to the surface?
Well, I want to show that we had a policy and an outlook, a philosophy that was spectacularly successful, despite all the problems that we had, that there was a continual and sustainable increase, step by step, let's say, in man's powers. And this was something that the people who promoted this rise, not only in America, but partners in other countries, had they had a goal that was universal. All of them did. All the ones who who had this program, this policy. And the more you research how our past advances have been made, our past successes have been made, our past happiness has happened. The more you get into it, the more you see that we can do this. That this is the only way that you get to this. There are some profound lies that are told about history. One of them I'm gonna get to today is that nationalism is equated with Hitlerism or fascism. And this is the deepest lie, because nationalism, as it actually was practiced in the world, in the US and the world, was the advancement philosophy, and those who went to break the nationalism directly organized the world for fascism. It's also based on the philosophy of limited fixed resources, which is, we'll see where this comes from, what that's about, how these lies were rooted in history, and how our successes must be understood. So happiness is not gained simply from material advances, but without feeding and clothing and giving stability and peace to human beings. Please don't talk about happiness. Happiness is not found in suffering and dying when that's imposed on millions of people.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that that sparks pretty nicely into the conversation we want to have, because you focus the end of volume two and the beginning of volume three in this 1890s period, which featured a clash of two worldviews, a clash of two systems. And what is it, what is it about the 1890s that you think is the most important shaper of the battle plan, or of the battle that was to then affect the next coming generations, surrounding this conflict between this idea that we should all be just happy serfs, happy in our stasis, and in our noble savagery, in harmony with nature on the one hand, versus a system more befitting of a human species. So how did that manifest itself in the United States and abroad in the 1890s?
In the Union victory in the Civil War, this terrible war that was forced on the United States and on Lincoln, the Union victory and the failure of the coup d'état that was aimed at in the murder of Lincoln, they were aiming at the whole government to be wiped out. It didn't happen, and Lincoln's policies and outlook, in many respects, continued in the decades following. There was a period of intensive advancement from beginning right after the Civil War, 65, 75, 85, 95. So 30 years from the end of the Civil War to the middle of the 1890s. And during this time, the United States went through a success and an increase in its power, not power to destroy. This is not primarily military power. It's something that could underlie military power if necessary, but that was definitely not the point. And the U.S. was at peace, except on the frontier. But that, we can discuss that separately. But the the other countries of the world saw this, and in the 1890s, we had some successful, tremendous developments within our economy. For example, the growth of electrification within the U.S., the growth of giant machines, the use of now a new scale of industry, a new scale of success in using, electricity, for one thing, is more efficient and more and cleaner in a factory. We went over to this in the 1890s, similar to the 1840s. Long after steam had been invented, U.S. machinery went to steam power in the 1840s, and metal machines. Now in the 1890s, we have the effectiveness of steel mills, massive steel mills. One of the things that we had, I'll get to some of this in a minute, but during the 1890s, we began reaching out to other countries in a new way. We had already been helping Russia, Germany, and Japan in the 1870s to develop their industries. We spread the idea of protectionism and state intervention, not to control the people, but to develop the industries, to help the people blossom in what they do. This was something that things were shifting in many different countries, with the U.S. providing the light for this and the example within our country. So now in the 1890s, we'll get to some of these projects that were done by Americans in and at the end of this 1890s period. And this spelled the end of the system of oligarchism. It could have done this was a threat is posed, because if this kind of success rapid step-by-step progress in creating workforces that are intelligent and stopping them from being destroyed, as had been earlier the case. Then we see the possibility of a change from tragedy of thousands of years of oligarchism.
Mhm.
So, I'd like to go through a few of the advances within the United States that were occurring then, and then
Yeah.
show these projects overseas, because the combination of inside our country and outside the country is the world challenge to the enemy system.
Yeah.
You cannot do one without the other.
Right. And you make a big point that you have the two opposing traditions embodied during this period of those who are adherent to the practices of policy initiatives and general philosophy, both domestic and foreign, of Abraham Lincoln, represented by the figure of William McKinley, who plays a very big role in the history that you've brought to the surface, but also, I guess you could say, the heirs of today's deep state, in the form of those who are supporting the restoration of the ethos of the Confederacy, of the slave power, of the New York, London connected bankers who really had no love whatsoever, if anything, disdain for the ideals of the American Revolution. And these two different factions were really battling it out. Who were some of the players on the side of the Lincoln networks, around McKinley, who were really supporting this idea of industrial progress, scientific breakthroughs for everybody, and improvement, versus the opposing class?
All right. Well, let's look at, first of all, Henry Carey
Mm.
was the original formulator of the program that the U.S. followed from 1861 up through the end of the century. That is the high tariffs, uh, the use of credit, cheap money. It wasn't always practiced that way, but we got this advance in industry, and we had a tariff level that stayed in the 40% level, uh, which means that it's a 40% tax on imports. And Carey, in the 1850s, in his book that was read by everybody who was studying uh, real economics in the world, it was Principles of Social Science. In that book, 1858, he attacked the British Empire in India, in particular, for taking down the industry that was there in India, and bringing to an end the multitude of industries. They didn't have powered industries, but they had factories. They had beautiful cloth making. They had many different types of factories, iron making, and the British were simply closing those factories down and turning what had been larger towns and industries into jungles. Jungles were spreading in India. Forests, thick, tangled forests were spreading. And in those forest areas were small villages of famine, death for the people who were denied the opportunity to work and make themselves a living. They also made them produce opium instead of food, and so forth. So Carey nailed this completely, and this idea of that there was an opposition to this way of barbaric looting and destruction was became known throughout the world. There's leaders in India took note of what Carey was saying, and saw, and people in Europe and Asia and South America, elsewhere, saw the progress the U.S. was making. So let me go through a couple of these things in the United States. So we have the tariff protection, uh, which never went down below, even if the Democrats lowered it a little bit. McKinley was a congressman later. He became president. He put the tariff up to an even higher level beginning in 1890. It went into effect in 1892. So under that tariff protection, we got especially a thriving steel industry and many other industries. Out in Minnesota, the Mesabi Iron Range, Mesabi, had been surveyed by very clever people, and in 1895, Andrew Carnegie's steel company, which was the big one, the real driving force there, the Pittsburgh company. Carnegie and his a partner he had organized the open pit mining to mine iron ore that was vastly rich and dense. And they brought in steam shovels made by the Marion, Ohio company, Marion steam shovel and Bucyrus steam shovels, both of them. And they would scoop this up in great loads and put this onto rail cars and bring it back to make steel that became more and more effective and efficient. Now, you don't have to leave terrible waste piles and scars when you do this. And over the years, even even in the time of throughout the 20th century, people began learning how to do this, to recover the earth, to just not leave a mess. My wife told me about the copper mine out in Arizona, where she grew up out there, and she went to that mine with her uncle in the 1950s and saw there and compared it to other places that you could do effective recovery and simply use this resource for the aid of a higher living standard. If you have steel making and you use electricity in industry, and you have railroads with steel cars and so forth, the use of this new resource, new denser resources, then you are getting an advance over previous and a throughput, a fast throughput of your energy sources and of your metal sources and of your finished products that allows for a tremendous rise in the standard of living. All of this was then something else in 1895 was same time they started developing this iron ore project. That year, the Niagara Falls project was put through. George Westinghouse's company
Right.
led the way. And this was alternating current. It wasn't Edison's direct current. But by that time, the former Edison company, General Electric, was itself already doing the alternating current by late in the 1890s. So that was not really that much of an issue. Alternating current was used for long distance transmission. But the looking at America harnessing this massive flow of water, it's all the Great Lakes water that goes over the Niagara Falls. So it's a continent of water. So harnessing such a vast force for electricity and then transmitting it long distance first to Buffalo, city of Buffalo, and then using it elsewhere. This was a signal to the world, like our transcontinental railroad. At the same time, we have these foreign projects.
That always strikes me, like in your approach to revealing this history. Every time that there's a burst of legitimate progress domestically inside the United States, it's always simultaneously happening with a fight internationally as well. And you've outlined several domains where these
Yeah.
industrialists who are supporting the American system against its enemies were fighting to help Russia, Germany, and China. So I don't know.
Well, let
I
me go
could you
through this.
could you
This is
yeah, that would be
something
great.
we've got some new ideas of this with some
Mm,
basically discoveries that you shouldn't have to rediscover these things because they were something that was somewhat in the news back then, certainly big in the news in those countries. So I'm going to mention the projects in Russia, Mexico, and India. Now, remember, let's look at the picture of American nationalists. McKinley became president in 1897. He was elected in 1896. But the policy was general policy was an American economic nationalist policy, and we were at peace with the world. Russia was an empire, so-called, but it's not like the British Empire. They were trying to make a large nation. And the big project under Russian nationalists, led by Witte, Witta, Sergei Witte, was to take the Trans-Siberian Railroad, build it out from the European sector of Russia all the way to the Pacific, going east, thousands and thousands of miles, with the end project at the Pacific to have Russia and China jointly developing. That was Witte's idea. And what was happening in America? America had 25,000 workers in Pennsylvania and nearby Ohio, primarily Pennsylvania at that point, building, making the steel rails and the locomotives and the electrical components. Again, Westinghouse, maybe General Electric, to build up these are the components of the Russian rail project to get Russia and China working together to get Russia to become this great nation that would be our partner in world affairs. We're both going to the Pacific. At the same time, in 1897, the former engineer that was supervising Carnegie's furnaces back in the heyday of building up Andrew Carnegie's steel company in Pittsburgh. This guy was named Julian Kennedy, and he was so skilled. Everything he did was a success, inventor, so forth. So now in the 1890s, he's become a consultant, independent consultant, and he goes to Russia and organizes the construction using American components that are shipped over there of a steel mill in Mariupol. This is in the Donetsk area of what was recently called Ukraine. It was Russia then, and it's Russia again now. But this steel center built up there by American experts and with Russia's nationalist goals became the center of Russia's steel work into the future, all the way into this period later, decades later, when the Soviets built up other centers, and also with American help later on as well. So this is a great project in Russia. One of the things that they made at this Mariupol plant was pipes for the Baku oil development in Russia. So we are aiding Russia's emergence as a great power. And Russia is on our side in the world fight for having countries like the USA and other great nations and aspiring nations also come up in the world. That was our side. The other side was the British Empire that said, we're not going to allow anybody to rise. We'll get to the counter proposal against the US policy just in a couple minutes. So the next place was Mexico. Oh, by the way, one of the new resources that we were developing was in Los Angeles, where a man named Edward Doheny, Doheny, Irish American activist, was created the oil industry of Los Angeles. And then he set his sights on Mexico. And he's an anti-imperialist activist. So when he goes down to Mexico, he runs afoul of Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company that wants to operate there. And he runs afoul of the British company called the Eagle Oil Company, Eagle Petroleum, under Lord Cowdray. And so Doheny is the one who builds up a new industry in Mexico, the petroleum industry. He's the founder of that industry in Mexico.
So when the Eagle Corporation of England or the Rockefeller Standard Oil Company are in Mexico, what are they doing differently from Doheny's approach?
The British are scouting around for likely places that they could sink wells, or maybe they have some other aims. They're not looking for the development of Mexico, and they're not looking for anything that's going to aid any country's development. The objective of the British that emerges as you get past the turn of the century is to get a fuel to replace coal in British battleships, British cruisers, and the British Navy, so that they can control the world. This is not for the development of anybody. Doheny's goal, increasingly with the oil in Mexico, is first of all, he has oil installations where Mexican workers are learning industrial skills. This is also true in the steel mills in Russia. The steel mill that was built by with Julian Kennedy's expertise and the American components. The Russian workers were learning these new industrial skills, and they got higher wages than in other industries. Same thing in Mexico. It wasn't ideal, but you had schools, and you had a progress here. At the same time, this is in 1900, Doheny goes in Mexico. The same year, the Mexicans built the first steel mill in Latin America, in Monterrey, Mexico. Monterrey. It's in the northern Mexican state of Nuevo León. This was built with American expertise, American components. One of the great engines that they had there. They had two of them, actually, from the William Todd Company of Eastern Ohio, a blowing engine to make the steel for the furnace, and the other components. They're all coming from the United States. Companies particularly in Eastern Ohio. These are cranes, beautiful cranes. They are boilers and furnaces and things, not boilers, but the kind of steel products and specialized machinery that you need to succeed at this. And I'm fairly confident that Julian Kennedy was on the job there. There's lots of very interesting evidence for that. He was
while Julian Kennedy was working with the Russians to help them
finished and went to Mexico,
and then went to Mexico to work with this network. Okay.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. He had a good deal of credibility and power in Mexico as a friend of the country. That installation in Monterrey was entirely for the benefit of Mexico. It was not to like a silver mine, that the Guggenheims or somebody else might go and dig a mine and then have some rail line that went to the border and take silver out. And who's benefiting from that? People aren't learning any skills, and the profits and the materials go out of the country. The steel mill was for the purpose of industrializing Mexico and changing it from a vulnerable country that could be preyed upon by American or British imperialists. So this was the program of the governor of Nuevo Leon, this northern state. His name was Bernardo Reyes, Reyes, and he was a leader of the nationalist faction of Mexico. He's opposed by the so-called científicos, who were European imperialist oriented, anti-American, but not anti-imperialist. They were for the British and French combination of imperialism, and they were led by a guy named Lee Montour. They were positivists and opposed to the tradition of man in the image of God. They totally rejected the idea that man has a destiny of the population of mankind becoming higher and higher. This completely rejected by these European imperialists. So Bernardo Reyes had a plan for industrializing the country. The other side both rejected this, and these are both advisors and the actual factions underneath the president, Porfirio Diaz. Diaz was generally favorable to modernization, but people have no understanding of what he was really doing, because you have these two sides. American nationalists working with nationalists in other countries versus American imperialists in Boston and New York working with the King of England and the British, city of London and the empire to crush national aspirations all over the world. So these are the two sides operating. So you have this fantastic, beautiful steel mill, which produced steel well into the 1980s, when it shut down I don't remember the exact date, around 1980. Maybe it was in the late 70s or in the early 80s, at the same time as U.S. industry was being deindustrialized, shut down. But this is the foundation for Mexico's possible progress and sovereignty. If you can have this kind of industry, you have sovereignty. So now let's go to the next place, which is India.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, like, up until now, it's such a breath of fresh air to hear you just go through this, because we're always fed this very one-dimensional story of Mexico and Latin America more broadly just having been subjugated, subverted by American imperialism. The appreciation for this positive network of nation builders who are fighting against the imperial class, the Rockefeller oriented so-called industrialists we tend to be today in our history books treated to this story that they're the only representative of American industry are these rapacious imperial oriented figures. But no, the fact that there's this other tradition is so important to bring to the surface as a fight over how do you define the nature of industry, the purpose of it, who will it benefit, who will it reap the fruits of scientific and industrial progress. It's super important. But no, don't let me stop you, because what you brought up, what you're going to be going through on the Indian front is super exciting as well. So yeah, what do you have for us there? How does this network interface with groupings in India?
So in India, there is recognition. One of the leaders there is a man named Ranade, Ranade, Mahadev Govind Ranade, and he's an economist who actually trashes the British School of Economics and recognizes Alexander Hamilton and Carey, Henry Carey, as having told the truth about what this false economic pseudoscience coming out of England is imposing, and the Indians, led by this guy, recognized that India was being deindustrialized was being taken down into catastrophic backwardness, lower, much lower than it had been. The British did not bring Western advancement to their colonies. They brought devastation. This is so important to understand this. There was a man over in England named John Ruskin in this period of the 1870s and 80s, and he was preaching that we have to go against industrial civilization, that we must go back to the simpler life, and that will be better for the workers and the common people and so forth. So he's a representative of what came to be New Age thinking, but we'll get to what that really amounts to. So in the 1880s, a man named Jamsetji Tata, that's Jamsetji, Jamsetji Tata. He's a Parsi from, the origin of the family goes back to, the mists of time to Persia. And he started family enterprises. In the 1880s, it was textile mills. Now, what was his strategy for these? He took a failing textile mill and revamped it, and he renamed it Swadeshi Mill. Swadeshi means independence. He said, look, we got to make really good cloth, high quality, and develop a workforce capable of doing this by giving them good conditions and the experience of becoming powerful workers who know what they're doing. Hmm. This is the first step towards industrialization. He had, and this, he was succeeded. He beat the British in many different markets. He wanted to have people boycott British goods and have Indians be able to use their own cloth as they had throughout centuries. This is while the British are still trying to crush these industries. So he's developing this, and he had a program, a 3-part program to industrialize India. This is the same guy. So Jamsetji Tata had a program for industrializing India, his program. And he transmitted this down to his sons. And this was more and more became the program that would be realized. So the first thing is build steel. The second thing is build electricity generation. And the third thing is build advanced science, education, and advanced research, fundamental science research. So the first thing that he did for the steel making is he went in 1902, he went to Pittsburgh. And I'm sorry, scratch that. He went to Cleveland because in Cleveland was the manager of William McKinley's political career named Mark Hanna. This is now in 1902 after McKinley had been assassinated and Teddy Roosevelt is president. But this guy Tata knows what's going on in the world. He knows what America's done, and he doesn't just go to Washington. He goes to the chairman of the Republican Party, who's loyal to the Lincoln and McKinley school of thinking, Mark Hanna. And Mark Hanna has his own iron and steel operations. So Mark Hanna convenes a meeting, maybe 20 industrial people, in his office, or it may have been in a hotel, I'm not sure. And there they talk to Tata about what he's trying to do. He wants to fund a steel mill. He has other plans as well. And so they put their heads together. Some of the people that were there were Hoist makers, Brown Hoisting Company, and other steel makers. But Mark Hanna, this consummate political leader of the nationalist school, puts Tata in touch with Julian Kennedy over in Pittsburgh. So he goes to Pittsburgh, he meets with Julian Kennedy, and Kennedy says, you need a lot of expert help. Kennedy organizes the project. He gets a guy up in New York, Charles Page Perrin, and other experts involved, and clearly gets the entire array of American components ready. So Kennedy and other Americans go to India, and this Tata pays for this project. This is not some, American taxpayer foreign aid. What we're talking about is sharing the blessings of genius and of the mild nationalist system of the United States of America. And other nationalists in other countries are working with us, and they are geniuses. And they believe in man and the goodness of man and the variety of ways that you can have that goodness. This guy, Tata, was a Zoroastrian, so he was familiar with all these religions. He actually had a tour of Palestine and he had a good sense of humor about what was going on there. Get to that some other time. But so they built this steel mill, and this became the foundation stone for India's progress into the future. The Indian National Congress had been founded back in the late 1880s. Tata was a promoter of that. This other guy, Renata, were also, but the nationalists, all the nationalists were backing Tata. Even people that got into a sort of a anti-industrial frame of mind, they all had to smile and say Tata is our benefactor for the country, because he didn't do anything just for personal gain. And he's making huge amounts of money and plowing this into building up the country. It's amazing. He's similar to the whole complex of the nationalists and scientists and humanitarians in Philadelphia, going back to Ben Franklin. It's the same outlook, exactly.
Would you say under this grouping that the caste system in India was also diminishing in its influence through this approach to progress?
It's a good point. Good point. Renate and Tata were dedicated to the advancement of the nation, and they saw this kind of caste system and discrimination and hatred and the loathing of supposed superiors to inferiors as the same thing as imperialism. They could see that. They understood these things. And so when you see leaders of this kind of change for the better, industrial scientific change, they are always of this type. They're never racially race haters, never. And you often see this real pearl of a character, and you see this with Jamsetji Tata. So while he had been in Pittsburgh in 1902, he also went to see George Westinghouse. And Westinghouse took him up to Niagara Falls, a few hundred miles on trip through America, and so he could see the new installation for producing electricity using the massive power of nature for man's benefit. And so then this is part of his plan. So Tata then, back in India, developed in the Ghats mountains, GATS, developed fantastic new hydroelectric plants. And this is the foundation of electricity development in India. The British had done little bits of electricity. They'd done a lot of railroads in India, but those railroads had never been for the benefit of the country. They were used to transport troops and to transport loot out of the country. Only all of that to crush out the forward motion of the nation. So the next thing that the Tata family did, and Tata died in 1904, so his sons carried out this steel mill and the electrification. They didn't get to electrify the whole country. And the steel mill was, that was basically it. They didn't build them all over the country, but this was a tremendous, I guess it might have been certainly the largest in the region of it had pretensions of being the biggest in the world in many ways. And they had done clever, surveying for the whole country for all the resources, the iron ore and everything. All of this was a massive Indian achievement under the noses of the British Empire. Nehru commented from prison that in 1946, later on, that the British government was unhappy about this. The American experts helped to do this. 1946, Nehru. So, but then the third arm of this program, the Tata program, was the science development. So they set up a science institute for fundamental research, and this was strongly developed by the Tatas and revered by the country, and this became the institute where was the center of the nuclear research in the in the middle of the 20th century, when India was independent. And so you see here the use of resources that were not resources. What about iron and coal? Not resources until you can access them. You look under the floor of forests. Some forests shouldn't even have been there, but so you should have had towns, right? So now you got forests. I don't know, but they found these resources. Then they use the resource of falling water. And then you use the resource of uranium, right? A later thorium. These are all things that lay hidden in nature, the secrets unknown, until the genius of people looking for the benefit of mankind in their own country, nationalists for their own country, and friends of nationalism in other countries, working together in tandem and together in these projects. So that's what happened. Now, let's look at what happened in the United States. You can see how much of a threat this is to the system. The world sees all these things going on. They see what America is doing. So you have a coup d'etat that comes to the United States. 1898, there's a faction pushing for war, for the United States to go to war. Well, who are we going to go to war with? Who's our enemy? Well, the empire, the British Empire, the French Empire had been an enemy, but they're not a threat to us. It's the British Empire has friends in America who are trying to crush out our development. And so there's a faction in the United States, in Boston and New York, particularly in Boston. This is the two of them are the Teddy Roosevelt faction, but you have the Henry Adams and his brothers. You have Alfred Thayer Mann, Mahan, the admiral, and they have the theories of that the United States must pursue an imperialist role. We must have war. They glorify war. They glorify the British Empire and the rule of the white people who speak English over the rest of mankind. And they push for a war with Spain. Why
Right.
Spain? Well, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, Thehan was a famous enemy of the concept of rail development as well, and he was promoting a lot of his works,
Yeah,
glorifying the British superiority of sea power and how America should do everything possible to
right.
emulate Britain's expansive sea power in order to control the world via
Yeah,
choke points
that
and basically,
that sort
yeah.
of misses that if when people use that, that's the theme, right? Sea power.
Mm,
But that simply is taking a snapshot of what the British are doing in the world with their navy and with their controls over the rim of these land masses, uh, to control Eurasia, Asia, Africa, and Latin America from the sea. But what's the policy? The big policy for Eurasia is to crush Germany and Russia, to both of them. And so they want to make sure that these countries, that the American program is not carried out. We've already made helped Germany to become powerful, industrialized. Russia is headed towards the Pacific, and so are we in many ways. We have Alaska, we have some development going on towards the west, and the British plan and Mahan's plan and Teddy Roosevelt goes along with this is to use Japan, our former ally, where we had helped to build up their industries. The British and Teddy Roosevelt want to use Japan to attack Russia, to attack China, to stop Russia from getting to the Pacific. The British want to use Japan to stop Russia and America from going to the Pacific. And Britain is building a navy for Japan in the 1890s, the very same period I've just been talking about,
mm.
1897, 89, in British shipyards. They're building a huge battleship navy, more battleships for Japan than for England at that time. And so that the program is to get war against Russia and Germany and crush them and have chaos and have
Yeah.
destruction. That's the program to
Yeah.
stop this American influence and American interests from being carried out. So in 1898, this Boston faction, the Boston Brahmins, the Anglophile uh, worshippers of white superiority, and make no mistake, they're talking about white skin as something wonderful in itself, not America, white skin.
Yeah.
And where is the whitest skin of all is in England. And they are the lords over lesser people, not just dark-skinned people, but Irish people, for example, Chinese people, you know, black people in America, all those lesser people, and people in India and Egypt. I don't know what color all those people. There's lots of different
Well,
colors. It's
I
irrelevant.
that caught me, yeah, when I was reading Thayer Mahan's work, the his emphasis upon the this obsession to categorize the human population into
Yeah,
castes of the Aryan Teutonic is the best and the
yeah.
Saxon is the best, and then the Slavs and then the darker skinned Negroids and things. He's
I know
very caste system
it's all
oriented
fake.
in how
It,
yeah,
it
yeah.
it's the basic thing that's going on is this powerful progress and the idea of progress that is now sweeping through the world, and they
Mhm.
have to crush this out. So, uh, within the United States, who are these people now in Boston? The Adams brothers. They are grandsons of John Quincy Adams, but enemies of what John Quincy Adams and the American founders stood for. Absolute, diametrically opposed. They are members of the Cobden Club. They're free traders. That's the British Free Trade Organization. They hate McKinley, and they're Republicans, most of them. Some are Democrats. Doesn't matter. Also in this faction, although not political in the normal sense, are J.P. Morgan, the British firm that now has this powerful branch in the USA, and John D. Rockefeller and his both in his oil monopoly and his growing oil monopoly and his Wall Street side, banking. And he's also into the steel and iron and all this, everything is with J.P. Morgan. So this is the other side. This is the enemy side, the British faction. So in 1898, with Teddy Roosevelt as their sort of roaring lion, they push and force through a war with Spain. President McKinley cannot hold out against the onslaught, the political onslaught of people saying the poor people in Cuba are being beaten up by their Spanish rulers. It's a colony of Spain. The poor people of the Philippines are being beaten up by their terrible rulers in Spain. We need a war to liberate these people from these guys. So they start a war. McKinley has to go along with it. He can't hold out anymore, but he's desperate. And we have a lot of work on this. I've done a program with your friend before, on this, what happened to get this. This is the first step in the coup d'etat, is to force this war against the wishes of President McKinley. Mm-hmm. The second step, that's in 1898. We're still doing what we need to do aside from this, but this is a grievous blow to America's. People are saying, "What the heck is this? What is America doing?" That had been at peace for decades. The next step is in 1900 at the Republican Convention. This imperial faction does blackmail against Mark Hanna and McKinley to get Teddy Roosevelt, McKinley's political enemy, in as the vice presidential running mate with McKinley. There was no vice president because the first term vice president for McKinley had died. So Teddy Roosevelt is now the vice presidential candidate with President McKinley running for re-election, 1900. They pulled blackmail at the convention.
Do you know what they did? How they were? What kind of?
They said they worked the rules and the various kinds of intrigues to say that we are going to stop the black representatives from the southern states that were still hanging on down there as Republicans from Reconstruction times. We're going to stop them from voting. We will take away McKinley's base among black people so that blacks will effectively have no vote at this convention if you don't put Teddy Roosevelt in as the vice presidential candidate. And he had to go along with it. He's a civil rights man, McKinley. He's weak in some other areas, but it's not worth it. I'm not making a saint out of him, but he was a man who believed in progress, and part of that was the rights of black people. So the next step, they get elected, right, in November of 1900. It's a new century. 2 months later, in January, an evil omen. The Queen of England died, Queen Victoria, and her cultish and mysteriously evil son, Edward VII, was Prince of Wales. Now he's calling himself, he's Edward VII, becomes the king. This is in January of 1901. In February, McKinley, they have this new ticket. Teddy Roosevelt hasn't been inaugurated as vice president yet. Then in February of 1901, a new super corporation is announced, United States Steel Company. J.P. Morgan makes a monopoly over virtually the entire, not everything. There were some other independent companies, Republic Steel, so there's other companies that are not in this, but most of the steel industry in America, including especially Carnegie's holdings, are all taken over. U.S. Steel. So he's on the way to becoming the dictator of U.S. industry. And this is a British firm. The real headquarters of it is in London, even though the money now is based in New York.
U.S. Steel headquarters is in London as a head.
No, the J.P. Morgan firm, not U.S.
Oh,
Steel. U.S.
right.
Steel, their headquarters
Okay.
is New York, right?
Right.
But the basic steel mills are in
Well,
Chicago. And
yeah, because is that because J.P. Morgan originally came out of this George Peabody operation in the 1850s
that's part
that
of
brought
it,
in?
but it's what came out of Peabody,
Hmm.
which is the father of J.P. Morgan, Junius Morgan, sets up his own bank in the 1860s in London, and he becomes a part of the British imperial establishment
Hmm.
during the Civil War.
Hmm.
And so now you have this instrument for sabotage of the United States.
And this is the period too,
And he
1902,
gets
when
his son, J.P. Morgan. I have this in volume 2. He gets his son, J.P. Morgan, in 1872 to set up his own firm. That's when there
right.
was a new firm. But let me go on with this coup d'etat. I
Sure.
think
And
it's
I was just going to say, just to add to that 1902 is also the year that you have the Pilgrim Society that's established in London first and then in New York with J.P. Morgan and Cornelius
that's
Vanderbilt
right.
and all
That's
of these
right.
figures,
That's what you're talking
basically
about.
devoted to reintegrate the U.S. back under the British
Well, how do
control.
they do that though? So you have a new king, Edward VII, and you have then you have these people are inaugurated in March of 1901. McKinley again and Teddy Roosevelt, vice president, and I believe it's September, while McKinley's making a speech on helping South America and Central America and the U.S. all together to develop with reciprocal tariffs to aid everybody. And we're negotiating with Colombia to build a canal through the nation of Colombia, through their province of Panama. And we want a railroad that connects the continents. That's all going on. He's making a speech on the subject of peace. And he's shot to death by an anarchist. Now, the anarchist movement is operating in Russia. It's operating in America. It's operating in France. It's operating in Spain. It's all based in London. This is notorious. That's the headquarters for the anarchist movement. And so Teddy Roosevelt becomes president of the United States,
Hmm.
puts up the Pike statue uh, uh, within a couple of weeks, I think, after he takes over in October.
Yeah, it's
The
really like a
statue
manifesto for
founder the Ku
what
Klux
America
Klan,
is going to be doing now, eh?
in Washington.
Yeah.
So then what happens is that Teddy Roosevelt works with the British and with the new king. And none of this is for the public. And nobody denies what I'm going to say here. This is simply that it wasn't put before the public at that time. It certainly has been before the public after that. But at that time, it wasn't put before the public because the public did not want an alliance with the British Empire. We certainly didn't want to have Japan become a military power to destroy our friendships all around the world and to keep us out of the Pacific and to keep and to ravage China and so forth. Who was for that? Only the British. Teddy Roosevelt and his friends in Boston said, "We don't like England. They're effete. They're not cruel enough to the people in India. They're bringing too much progress to these people. What they need to do is enforce white rule a little bit better. How come they're sissies?" Well, really, what he's really saying is, "I'm on your side. Make me a junior partner. I'm going to bring the money and the muscle to this." So anyway, this is what then happened. Teddy Roosevelt went in with the British to back the Japanese to attack Russia as they were attacking China. And you had the war in 1904, 1905 against Russia by the Japanese. The British had an alliance with them. I'm not going to get in deeply into this, but this is the program for U.S. joining with the British Empire. Now, the Panama Canal was dug in 1905 using these wonderful shovels, steam shovels, Bucyrus and Marion steam shovels, same one that had done the iron. By the way, Marion Company later on won the contract from NASA to build these massive crawler that carried the Apollo spacecrafts, all of the program, and later the shuttles to the launch pad. So this is the heritage of these giant machines from the 1890s. Wonderful stuff. Good outcome. But what about this Panama Canal? It was also a technical triumph in terms of conquering yellow fever. There was a scientist from Cuba named Finlay. He's actually Scottish heritage, but he's a Cuban. He was schooled in Philadelphia from a guy named Mitchell, Professor Mitchell, up there, who gave him the germ theory that he needed to gel the idea that mosquitoes transmitted a yellow fever. You couldn't build anything. The French attempt to build a canal had failed because the people all died of yellow fever. So we went door to door, house to house in Panama. Oh, this is after Panama was stolen from Colombia. Teddy Roosevelt used force, used false flag, and not just false flag. It supported a revolution from below against a secession movement to break off the part of Colombia nation that is called Panama. So set up this weak state, this weak nation called Panama, and then the canal was built not for the benefit of the hemisphere, but for the benefit of the British and American navies to police the world for the white people. This is a piece of insanity that helped to destroy American influence and interests all over the world. What's America's interests? Industry, science, raising living standards.
Well, that's
our interest as a nation. What's the interest of doing the canal this way instead of the way McKinley wanted to do it? It's the interest of the British to discourage the world from seeing, pay no attention. That America, what's that? There's no such thing as America. George Washington is just a racist, just like we are. Abraham Lincoln was a racist, just like we are. That's this crap that you hear today. That's all British. There is no such thing as any nation that ever defied imperialism for the progress of the people. So this is the background. Now, what the punchline of this whole thing is Teddy Roosevelt's policy called conservation. This was a program for limiting the development of the American West on the claim that it's too dry out there. There's not enough. You cannot have family farms. You can't have. Industry. You can't have cities. In the Rocky Mountains, you can't have it at the West Coast. What we want is a different model. We don't want to connect up with Asia. We want to connect up with the British in the world. Teddy Roosevelt also promoted Zionism late in his life after he was president. So it's as part of this British model. But what is conservation? Teddy Roosevelt's idea. The world has a fixed quantity and character of resources. What's the resource base? What was the resource base in 1700? Well, there was coal in certain places and was used for some things. What's the main fuel? Wood. What's the metal? Well, there's iron, there's copper, there's other things. These are minerals, but there's no such thing as steel on a mass basis. Just didn't exist for the public of the world. There was no petroleum. It was in the earth. There certainly was no uranium that anybody knew anything about. There was no water provided that makes electricity. None of this. These resources did not exist.
Yeah.
We brought them into existence, not only America, but our friends in other countries. So what is the Doheny in Mexico wanted to use the Mexican oil to power Mexican and other trains to go faster and better, to carry things better, diesel power instead of carrying a bunch of coal. Tata wanted to use electricity to make much more powerful steel making and other things. So using new resources for a more powerful future for mankind. According to Teddy Roosevelt and to the people in the British Empire, you need to conserve resources of the type that we have now and scale down people's ambition because there's fixed resources.
Yeah, I love this hypocrisy that under this logic, which we see again taking a certain form today, there's this idea that industry is okay to the degree that it's tied to military expansionism and suppressing the weaker cultures or races that we
Yes.
believe should be suppressed, but otherwise it's unnatural and we should somehow go back to some natural state for the general population that shouldn't have opportunities. Now, I had heard, I don't know if it was through reading your work or somewhere else, but Teddy Roosevelt had modeled his conservation program on the program that had already been applied to India by the British in their conservation
Yes,
strategies
that's
to
right.
crush Indian development. Is that true?
I brought this out in the Treason book, Treason in America, published in
Mhm.
1985.
Right.
Chief Forester under Teddy Roosevelt, Gifford Pinchot, was proud of the fact that he brought the word conservation from the British program in India, that it was their program in the forests of India. Well, what are those forests? A large part of them were made into tangled hells of jungle by the British taking down a previous civilization. So already you're lying. You're not conserving nature. You're making nature worse and more again averse to mankind. So what is this policy of conservation? Now you're going to start talking about preserving the races in the same way. The whole gang of conservationists in this period of the early 20th century going into the 20s were eugenics freaks and fascists. They got more and more into fascism at the same time as the people, these guys in Boston, this Anglo-American faction, were promoting fascism. The same time as Teddy Roosevelt spoke more and more of the need for the white races to police and bully those who are not white around the world, and to grab the resources. We have to grab. We're going to supervise these other people, and by and by they will develop. But what was the real policy? The real policy is looting and keeping them from developing. So what did Hitler do? That's what Hitler did.
Hmm.
That's the policy of fascism. And throughout the 19 teens and 20s, you have a succession of policies and increasingly dark philosophies. Then starting in 1920, the promotion in the Bank of England and Boston banks and others of the actual fascist regimes in Europe and the militarists in Japan. This faction brought fascism to the world. First, they brought the World War I catastrophe. So we go from a policy of peace and the success of our country and of other countries, the potential success of the whole world, to this catastrophe that befell mankind in the 20th century, in both world wars. and then permanent war after they murdered Kennedy, the same faction. So what you're talking about now is not simply two philosophies. That doesn't cut it, because people can say, well, they can argue about which philosophy is better. The history of our success is what you have to focus on. The history of the upgrading of resources, the history of stopping the depletion of the earth by getting new and more powerful resources that are much cleaner. You look at a town where the forest is stripped down and you're burning the trees, and it's filthy, and there's no modern science, and there's no sanitation and all this sort of thing. Then when you descend into a dark age, that's the filth and the backwardness and the sorrow and the hunger of the world that is promoted by these empires, including what the U.S. bought into. So, I would like to end this with just this very simple idea. It has been said, and still is said by fake historians and media, that nationalism is the equivalent of Hitler. Hitler was a nationalist. Fake, totally fake. Hitler practices this idea of a zero sum. You have to take what's there that somebody else has. And what was real nationalism was the joint development of our country and other countries. How was this taken off the rails? By the coming to power of these violent men who allied themselves with the empire against the interests and the influence of the United States of America by murdering a succession of presidents of the United States. So where is the Hitler? The Hitler's on the other side, not real nationalism. Where does Donald Trump stand? Well, I don't think he knows anything about this history. I really don't.
I was going to ask you, do you think, since protectionism, the specter, the name at least of McKinley is going, it's been popularized more and more since Trump has come back in, but do you think that which tradition do you think is more dominant right now in the current condition of the United States? Do you think it's the Teddy Roosevelt side that's more powerful, or do you think it's the McKinley tradition?
You can't look at it that way. You can't do it that way. You have to look at the real history, see this change, this violent, cataclysmic shift, and then Harding tried to put it back, failed. He was a civil rights man. And then FDR did take it back. And we started to restore the progress of our country and had a program for having the development of the powers of man all over the world. So we're talking about going back to the same forward motion. Kennedy, the same thing. So, but the change from McKinley, violently murdered, shot to death while calling for peace, the man who believed in war as a philosophy openly, Teddy Roosevelt. Yep. Why is Teddy Roosevelt's image, picture, photograph, drawing, portrait, why is his portrait in the White House? Why did Barack Obama agree and Bill Clinton agree with the current president, Trump, in worshiping a man who went against American interests and America's being a blessing to the world? Why would they do that? Because they don't have any clue about this. And of course they're fools.
Yeah, or why was why was Albert Pike's statue reinstated last month? You know, after being
Yeah,
taken down,
yeah.
it was
It
put
was
back in
foolish.
place. Why
It was
would
just
who made that
foolishness.
decision? Right? Yeah, no.
Exactly right. Yeah.
There's some dangerous
So
blind spots, that's for sure. So yeah, thank you very much, and I appreciate you putting people's focus where it should be. Since this past is not the past, it's not separated from our future, from the world that we're creating through our actions or lack of actions. So it's really important that people really take this in, take these lessons in, read your works. Your again, links to purchase your Who We Are Volume 2 and Volume 1 and the Treason in America book, which I think is still available. People can find it for free on archive.org, I believe. It's worth reading if people can find it. Otherwise, it's a bit rare nowadays. But I'm going to put all of that in the description box under this video with a link also to your Substack, which I encourage everyone to sign up for. You put things out pretty regularly. A lot of it is free, but I would encourage people to do the paid upgrade to get the extras as well. Anton, thank you so much for doing what you're doing and for devoting yourself to this cause of bringing this truth to light.
what I've gone through here is the opening chapters of the forthcoming book. I have to write the book, volume 3 of Who We Are, but this is where it starts.
Excellent. All right, so this is a good preview. Thank you very much.